The Galactic Empire ruled thousands of stars. Its fleets stretched across the spiral arms, crushing resistance wherever it appeared. To the Empire, there were no limits, no borders, and no powers that could challenge its rule. Every world, every system, every creature was destined to bow before the imperial throne. That was the belief carried in the hearts of the admirals, the soldiers, and the emperors who had expanded for centuries. Yet, in the far edge of mapped space, there was a region even the boldest cartographers avoided. It was marked on old charts with a single warning: the Forbidden Zone. For generations, that region of space was left alone. The stars within it shone brighter than most, but no one lived there, and no colonies survived long enough to record why. Whispers passed through smugglers and merchants, ships that entered never returned, voices were heard on empty channels, strange signals flickered like cries from the past. But the Empire did not fear legends. The admirals of the Empire laughed at old warnings. To them, the zone was just another frontier waiting to be taken. The order came from the Imperial High Command. A fleet of 3 heavy cruisers and 6 escorts would cross into the zone. Their mission was simple: map it, claim it, and plant the Imperial banner for the throne. The commander of the fleet, Admiral Kavarn, was proud of the task. He believed he would be remembered as the man who crushed the superstition of the Outer Rim. In his mind, this was not war, it was a hunt against shadows. The fleet gathered at the edge of the zone. From the bridge of his flagship, Kavarn looked out into the black curtain of stars. The boundaries of the zone were not visible, yet the scanners marked it clearly, as if an invisible wall separated it from the rest of the galaxy. His officers reported strange readings, shifts in gravity, whispers of energy that made no sense. Kavarn waved them off. "Space always lies to weak men," he said. "Only power reveals truth." With that, the Empire fleet crossed the boundary. The moment they did, silence fell across the comm channels. Static hissed, lights dimmed, and for a second every ship felt heavier, as though dragged downward by unseen hands. The officers panicked, reporting failures across half the systems. Weapons locked without orders, shields flickered, and engines trembled as if resisting the command to move forward. Kavarn barked orders with fury, demanding control, demanding obedience. The crew obeyed, but deep in their hearts they felt something was wrong. The zone was not empty, it was watching. Hours passed as the fleet moved deeper. Strange signals came through their receivers, like faint voices speaking in an ancient tongue. The language was unknown, yet somehow familiar, as though the words carried meaning older than the Empire itself. Young officers whispered to each other, claiming they heard the voices calling their names. The crew grew restless, and fear spread like poison. Then the first sighting came. One of the escorts reported a massive structure drifting in the dark. When the flagship adjusted its course, all ships saw it. A warship floated ahead, ancient, silent, and massive. Its hull bore no imperial markings. Instead, it carried scars of battles older than memory. The scanners struggled to measure it, as though the ship resisted being studied. The bridge went quiet. The crew looked at the shape, at the dead vessel larger than any they had seen. Whispers passed among them. Some said it was a ghost ship. Others said it was the last relic of the humans. That word, humans, was rarely spoken anymore. The Empire's records listed humanity as a primitive species long erased, scattered to dust ages ago. And yet, here was a ship, heavy with silence, resting inside the zone as though guarding it. Admiral Kavarn did not believe in ghosts or lost civilizations. He gave the order to approach. The Imperial fleet closed in on the vessel, lights scanning across its hull. No power was detected. No life signs. To Kavarn, it was a prize, proof that the legends were lies. He spoke with pride, already imagining himself presenting this relic to the throne. But then something happened. As the Imperial cruisers circled the warship, lights flickered along its hull. A low hum echoed across the void, deep and terrible, like the growl of an ancient beast. The scanners screamed with warnings, energy surging, weapons charging. The ghost ship was not dead. It was waking. The crews shouted, panicked, begged for retreat. But it was too late. The Forbidden Zone had opened its eyes. The Empire had crossed the line. And something old, something human had just begun to stir. The ghost ship did not move at first. It floated in silence, half hidden in the shadow of a dying star. But every Imperial scanner screamed with warnings. Energy built inside the ancient vessel, power levels rising far beyond anything the Empire had ever seen. On the flagship's bridge, Admiral Kavarn clenched his fists as he watched the readings climb. His officers begged him to retreat, their voices filled with fear. Yet Kavarn refused. "It is an old machine," he said. "It cannot harm us. Fire control. Ready weapons." But the crew knew this was no ordinary derelict. The ship's hull glowed with lines of light, spreading like veins under its dark armor. It was as if the vessel itself was alive, pulsing with purpose after centuries of silence. Suddenly, every comm channel filled with static. Out of that static came faint whispers, broken words that no one could understand. They sounded like voices speaking across time. Some officers swore the voices spoke their own names. Others heard laughter, cold and distant. The zone was no longer quiet. It was speaking. Fear grew among the fleet. The youngest officers trembled, remembering the rumors of humanity. Though the Empire had declared humans extinct long ago, stories remained. Smugglers claimed that humans once built ships that thought like minds and weapons that never missed their target. The zone, they said, was not abandoned space but a graveyard built to keep intruders away. Now, standing in the shadow of the ghost ship, those stories no longer felt like lies. The warship stirred. Its engines glowed with a dim blue light. Slowly, impossibly, the vessel began to turn. Metal groaned like thunder across the void as the ship aimed its prow toward the Imperial fleet. Kavarn shouted for his fleet to hold formation, but many officers hesitated. The escort captains whispered to each other, asking if they should flee. Their scanners showed the impossible. The ship was older than the Empire itself, yet its systems were stronger than anything they had ever faced. Then, without warning, the ship sent out a signal. It was not a weapon, not at first. It was a transmission, a voice carried in a language no one recognized. The sound was broken and distorted, but every Imperial officer felt the meaning deep inside their chest. It was not words they understood, it was a warning. The moment the signal ended, the warship's weapons lit up. A single lance of white fire erupted from its hull. The nearest Imperial escort vanished in a flash, broken apart before its crew could even scream. The shockwaves slammed into the other ships, rocking them like leaves in a storm. Panic filled the fleet. Officers shouted, alarms blared, and the Empire's proud formation scattered like prey animals. Kavarn screamed for order, demanding return fire. His cruisers obeyed, launching volleys of plasma and missile storms. The shots raced across the void, striking the warship's hull with fury. But none of them worked. The blasts disappeared into a shimmering shield that rippled like water. The ghost ship did not slow, did not even tremble. Its weapons glowed again, preparing another strike. The Empire had fired its strongest guns, but the vessel remained untouched, as if laughing at their effort. Inside the ships, fear turned to madness. Some crew members whispered that they could hear voices calling to them, speaking through the walls, through the static of the comms. Others claimed to see shadows of humans standing in the corners of their eyes. One navigator screamed that the ship itself was alive, that it was not metal but something more. Whether true or madness, the terror was real. The second strike came. Another escort was torn apart, its wreckage spinning into darkness. Then a third. In minutes, 3 ships of the proud Imperial fleet were gone. The Empire had come with strength, but here, in the Forbidden Zone, their strength meant nothing. They were insects beneath the gaze of something far greater. Finally, the ghost ship stopped firing. Its weapons dimmed, and for a moment there was silence. Then the transmission came again. This time the voice was clearer, louder. It echoed across every ship, carried on every channel. The words were not in Imperial standard, yet the meaning was unmistakable. A warning, a command, a truth carved into the bones of the stars. Leave. Now. The fleet froze. Officers looked to Kavarn for orders, but the admiral's face was pale, his pride broken by fear. He did not believe in warnings, yet here was one he could not ignore. Still, his arrogance fought against his reason. To retreat would be to admit weakness. To admit that humans, long thought dead, had power the Empire could not match. He clenched his jaw, caught between his pride and survival. The ghost ship held its aim, weapons charged, waiting for the Empire's answer. Around it, more shadows moved in the dark, as though other ships were hidden, watching, waiting to awaken. The Forbidden Zone was alive, and the Empire had woken something that should never have been disturbed. Admiral Kavarn made his choice. He raised his hand and ordered his fleet to prepare for battle. The voices whispered louder. The shadows grew closer. Humanity was not gone. Humanity was here. The Imperial fleet tightened its formation, though fear trembled in every crew member's heart. Admiral Kavarn stood firm on the bridge of his flagship, his eyes locked on the massive ghost ship that hovered like a predator in the dark. Around it, shadows drifted, shapes that might have been other vessels or tricks of the zone. The admiral's voice thundered through the comms, ordering his fleet to ready weapons. Pride filled his words, but his officers knew the truth. He was afraid. For the first time in his long career, Kavarn faced an enemy he could not understand. The ghost ship's lights glowed brighter, its hull humming with power. The eerie voices continued to spill into the Empire's comms, sometimes clear, sometimes broken, like echoes of long-dead humans speaking from the void. Each whisper carried weight, pressing on the minds of the crew until some could barely hold their sanity. Yet Kavarn ignored their fear. He raised his hand, and with one word, gave the order. Fire! The Empire unleashed its strength. Plasma blasts, missile barrages, and beams of focused energy shot across the void. The blackness of space lit up with explosions as dozens of weapons struck the ghost ship at once. For a brief moment, the Admiral allowed himself to believe. The screens flared with impact markers, showing direct hits across the vessel's hull. Officers cheered nervously, hoping the nightmare was finally over. But when the light cleared, their hope died. The ship was untouched. Every strike had been swallowed by a shimmering barrier that rippled across its skin. The shields glowed like a living wall, absorbing firepower equal to what could level entire star systems. Then, with cold silence, the ghost ship responded. Its prow lit with a white glow, brighter and brighter, until it became a beam of death. One of the Empire's heavy cruisers took the blast head-on. The beam cut through its shields as if they were made of paper, slicing the vessel in half. The cruiser's core detonated, erupting in a violent fireball. The wreckage scattered across the zone, and hundreds of Imperial lives were gone in an instant. The crew of the remaining ships froze in terror. Their weapons had done nothing, yet one strike from the ghost ship had destroyed one of their strongest war machines. Chaos spread across the fleet. Some officers shouted to flee, others begged for another volley. Kavarn screamed for them to hold their ground. His voice cracked with desperation, but his pride would not allow retreat. The Empire was invincible, he told himself. No ancient relic could stand against their might. He ordered another round of fire. Again the fleet opened fire. Again the ghost ship stood unharmed. The shield drank every blast, shimmering brighter with each strike as if feeding on the energy. Then came the second retaliation. This time the ghost ship fired 3 beams at once. 3 escorts were erased, their screams cut short as their ships crumbled into dust. The remaining vessels reeled in panic, scattering across the void, breaking formation as survival became their only thought. The ghost ship did not chase. Instead, its comms opened again, and a single voice boomed across every Imperial ship. The words were no longer broken, no longer whispers. They were clear, sharp, and filled with cold authority. Leave now. This space is not yours. The officers listened in horror. They understood the voice, though it was not in their language. It was as if the meaning reached straight into their minds. Kavarn's bridge fell silent. The Admiral gritted his teeth, his pride wounded deeper than any weapon could strike. To retreat now would destroy his honor. To admit that humanity still existed would shatter the image of Empire's eternal dominance. He shook with fury, torn between pride and survival. One of his captains broke the silence. "Admiral, those are not ghosts. They are human." The word carried weight, a weight heavier than war. If humans still lived, if they possessed ships that could survive the full might of the Empire, then everything the Empire believed was a lie. Humanity was supposed to be extinct, erased long before the Empire rose to power. Yet here, in this zone, they had awakened something that should have remained hidden. The ghost ship's weapons powered down, but its shields remained. The voice spoke once more, calm and final. "This is your last warning. Leave, or be destroyed." Kavarn's fists shook. His fleet had already lost 4 ships. His men were breaking. Fear poisoned every officer's heart. Yet still, he could not retreat. He could not admit that humanity had defied extinction. He turned to his crew with eyes of iron. "Signal High Command," he said. "Tell them what we have found. And prepare for another assault." The crew stared at him in disbelief. They had already seen the power of the ghost ship. They had heard the human voice that commanded them to leave. And now the Admiral was demanding they fight again. Yet no one dared refuse. The orders were given, weapons were armed, and the fleet prepared for another desperate strike. Out in the dark, the ghost ship waited. Its lights pulsed like the heartbeat of some great beast. The forbidden zone itself seemed to tighten around the intruders, the stars dimming, the shadows drawing closer. The Empire had ignored the first warning. They would not be spared the second. The voice of the ghost ship still echoed in the minds of the Imperial crews. "Leave, or be destroyed." The words were heavy, carrying the certainty of death. For most officers, the message was clear. The zone was alive, and it was forbidden. They wanted nothing more than to turn their ships around and escape into safe space. But Admiral Kavarn was not most officers. His pride was a weapon sharper than any blade, and he would rather die than retreat before an enemy long thought extinct. On the bridge of his flagship, his jaw tightened as he stared at the silent vessel ahead. "Signal High Command," he ordered coldly. "Tell them what we have found. Tell them humanity is not gone. And tell them I will crush this ghost with my own hands." His officers hesitated, fear shining in their eyes, but none dared disobey. Messages were sent across the stars, carrying the truth to the Empire's heart. Humans were alive, and their weapons were beyond reason. High Command's answer came swiftly. They did not believe Kavarn's warnings of voices and ghost ships. They believed he was afraid, or worse, that he wanted to excuse his failure. Their message was short and merciless. "Hold the zone. Reinforcements are on the way." The Admiral smiled grimly. Reinforcements meant more ships, more firepower, more proof of Imperial strength. In his mind, the zone would burn, and the name of Kavarn would be remembered as the man who ended the last shadow of humanity. Yet his crew did not share his confidence. Across the fleet, whispers spread. Some spoke of the strange voices that still haunted the comm channels. Others swore they saw flickers of movement in the stars, shapes of other ships hidden in the dark. Fear gnawed at them, and the warning of the ghost ship weighed heavier with every heartbeat. Days passed as they waited for reinforcements. The ghost ship did not move. It hovered in silence, its shields glowing faintly like the skin of some sleeping giant. But the fleet could feel its presence pressing down on them. It was not simply a ship. It was a sentinel, a guardian of something greater. At night cycles, crew members reported hearing footsteps in empty corridors, or voices calling them by name when no one else was near. Many begged to be allowed to leave. But Kavarn silenced them with threats and punishments. Finally, the Second Fleet arrived. 2 dreadnoughts, 10 cruisers, and dozens of escorts thundered into the zone. Their commanders laughed at Kavarn's reports, mocking the idea of a human ghost ship. "One relic does not frighten the Empire," one captain declared. "We will crush it in a single strike." With fresh courage, the Empire prepared for war. The attack began at once. The dreadnoughts led the charge, their guns filling the void with endless fire. Missiles streaked across the stars, plasma beams scorched the darkness, and the combined power of the fleets lit the zone brighter than a sun. For minutes, the ghost ship was hidden in the storm of destruction. The Empire cheered, convinced they had won. But when the light cleared, their victory turned to horror. The ship was untouched. Its shields shimmered like an ocean, rippling with energy. The combined firepower of the Empire had been swallowed whole. And then, the zone answered. The ghost ship's hull glowed with furious light. This time, it did not strike alone. Across the darkness, other shapes began to awaken. Hidden ships revealed themselves, their hulls massive, their engines burning with cold fire. They were human vessels, dozens of them, rising from the shadows like predators from the deep. The Empire had thought it faced one enemy. Instead, it faced an entire fleet. The first volley came with devastating speed. White beams cut through Imperial escorts, shredding them into fragments. Human drones swarmed the battlefield, small and fast, tearing into the Empire's lines like a tide of blades. Gravity mines appeared out of nowhere, pulling Imperial cruisers into deadly traps. Every weapon of the zone was older than the Empire, yet stronger, sharper, and perfectly designed for destruction. The Imperial fleet broke apart under the assault. Even the mighty dreadnoughts groaned as their shields collapsed. One dreadnought was torn open by a storm of missiles, its remains burning as a silent grave in the stars. The other struggled to hold, firing wildly, but every blast was dodged, deflected, or consumed by the humans' defenses. On the flagship, Kavarn watched with fury and disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered. "They cannot be stronger than us. They cannot." Yet his eyes told him the truth. Humanity was alive, and their technology was beyond comprehension. His officers turned to him, begging to retreat, but he shook his head. "No," he growled. "If we run, the Empire will know only fear. We fight until nothing remains." But the humans did not give them that choice. In the midst of the chaos, a transmission broke through the noise. A voice, calm and cold, filled every Imperial ship. "You were warned. You were given mercy. Now you will learn." The transmission ended, and the zone unleashed its fury. The battlefield burned with wreckage. Imperial ships drifted in pieces, their fires glowing like dying stars across the zone. The ghost ship hovered in silence at the center, its shields untouched, its weapons cooling after unleashing storms of death. Around it, more human vessels revealed themselves one by one, slipping out of the darkness as though they had always been there, waiting. The Empire had come with power, but now its strength lay shattered in the void. Survivors whispered that the zone itself was alive, and that it had awoken to punish them. But what they saw next was far worse than whispers. A new transmission cut through the chaos. It was not broken static, not strange whispers. It was clear, sharp, and carried a voice that chilled every Imperial soul. "This is Terran space. You were warned. You were told to leave. Now you will learn what happens when warnings are ignored." The words froze the crews. They understood every syllable. It was not a translation. The language was human, yet somehow it reached into their minds and became clear as thought. For the first time in centuries, the Empire heard the living voices of humanity. They had not vanished into history. They had not been erased. They had endured, hidden, and now they had returned with strength beyond imagining. On the flagship, Admiral Kavarn gripped the arms of his chair. Rage boiled inside him, but even he could not hide the fear in his eyes. "So it is true," he whispered. "They still live." Around him, his officers trembled. To them, humans were not just enemies. They were nightmares, the shadows of old stories told in secret. Tales of a species that refused to die, that fought wars no one could understand, that built ships stronger than any empire. Now those tales stood before them, real and merciless. The human fleet moved with terrifying precision. Small vessels cloaked and uncloaked in sudden bursts, striking with deadly accuracy before vanishing again. Imperial cruisers fired wildly into the dark, chasing shadows that disappeared before a single shot landed. Drones swarmed through the wreckage, finishing off damaged ships with brutal efficiency. Every Imperial defense was answered with ease, every tactic crushed before it could take shape. One Imperial captain dared to open a direct channel to the humans. His voice shook as he spoke. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reply came instantly, cold and unyielding. "We are humanity. And we want only this, for you to remember what you were told. Terran space is forbidden. Step inside again, and you will be erased." The captain fell silent. His crew wept quietly, for they knew they were already erased. Around them, ships exploded one by one. The battlefield was no longer a battle. It was a slaughter. Amid the destruction, one of the human ships drew closer to the flagship. It was massive, its hull black and scarred, its design unlike anything in Imperial records. The scanners could not read it, as if the ship itself refused to be measured. Kavarn stood tall as it approached, his pride refusing to bend. He expected another weapon strike, another beam to tear him apart. Instead, the human vessel opened a channel directly to his bridge. A figure appeared on the display. It was not a ghost, not an echo. It was a human. Pale, sharp-eyed, dressed in dark armor that glowed with faint blue lights. The crew gasped in horror. To them, it was like seeing a phantom step out of history. The figure spoke slowly, with calm certainty. "Admiral of the Empire, you brought your fleet into our sanctuary. You fired on our guardians. You killed where you were warned not to tread. And still you ask who we are? We are the Terrans. We never died. We never left. We waited." Kavarn's lips curled in defiance. "The Empire bows to no one. We will never fear you." His words rang with pride, but even as he spoke them, his fleet fell apart around him. He was a man standing against a storm, shouting into a void that cared nothing for his power. The humans' eyes narrowed. "Then you will learn." The transmission ended. The Terran warship turned its weapons toward the flagship, its cannons glowing with dreadful light. The crew screamed, but before the strike came, the ship paused. Instead, another transmission came, spoken across every surviving Imperial vessel. "This is your final chance. Leave our space. Tell your masters what you have seen. Tell them humanity lives." The words cut through the void like a blade. It was not mercy. It was a command. A warning etched into the future of the Empire. Kavarn trembled with rage, his pride shattering beneath the truth. Humanity had returned, not as weak remnants, but as rulers of the zone. His fleet had been nothing but a test, a lesson written in fire and death. Around him, survivors begged to retreat, to live, to carry the warning back. For the first time, Admiral Kavarn did not argue. He lowered his head, and with a voice heavy with fury, he gave the order to withdraw. The surviving ships turned, limping away, broken and silent. The Terran fleet did not chase. They simply watched, their weapons glowing like the eyes of predators in the dark. The Empire had come to claim the zone. Instead, they had awakened its guardians. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The retreat was chaos. Imperial ships limped through the void, their engines burning, their shields broken. Wreckage floated everywhere, glowing like scattered embers across the black. Yet the Terran fleet did not chase. They held their ground inside the zone, watching silently, their weapons still glowing, like predators letting their prey escape. For the survivors, this mercy was more terrifying than destruction. The humans could have ended them all, but instead they had allowed them to live. That meant only one thing: the message had to spread. The Empire was no longer unchallenged. Humanity had returned. On the flagship, Admiral Kavarn stood rigid, his pride bleeding away like sand slipping through his fingers. His crew watched him in silence, their eyes filled with questions he could not answer. They wanted to live, but they also wanted to understand. Why had the humans spared them? Why not finish what they had started? Kavarn's heart burned with fury. He told himself it was because the humans feared the Empire's true strength, that they knew more fleets would come. But deep down, he knew the truth. The humans had spared them because they did not see the Empire as a threat. They had treated them like insects, unworthy of effort. High Command received the reports days later. At first, they dismissed them as lies, the madness of broken men. But when the recordings were played, the voices of humans, the images of ghost ships, the destruction of dreadnoughts, the halls of power grew silent. The Senate demanded explanations. Admirals argued among themselves. Some called for peace, others for immediate war. But no one could deny the truth. The Empire had been struck, and for the first time in centuries, it had been afraid. As the Empire debated, the survivors spoke in hushed voices about what they had seen. They spoke of shadows in the stars, of ships that could not be touched, of weapons that defied reason. They spoke of voices that reached into their minds and commanded them to obey. Soldiers who had once believed the Empire invincible now looked over their shoulders, haunted by the memory of human eyes staring at them from the dark. Fear spread faster than fire. Meanwhile, in the zone, the Terrans were not silent. Their warships began to move, no longer hiding among the shadows. They patrolled the borders, their presence clear for all to see. Where once the zone had been marked as empty, now it glowed with signals, warnings broadcast into the stars. This space belongs to Earth. Enter at your peril. It was not a bluff. Every ship that tested the boundary vanished without a trace. Traders whispered of silent hunters in the dark. Scouts returned with shattered minds, claiming they had heard human voices whispering in their sleep. The zone had expanded beyond fear, it had become a wall. But the Empire was not built to retreat. Pride was its foundation, and humiliation was a poison it could not accept. High Command gathered a new fleet, larger than any before. Hundreds of ships, dreadnoughts, carriers, and weapons designed to tear apart entire worlds. The admirals declared they would not only retake the zone but burn it to ash, erasing the Terran threat forever. Across the galaxy, propaganda spread. Humanity was nothing more than a shadow, a myth to frighten the weak. The Empire would prove its strength once again. Yet among the soldiers, the fear remained. They remembered the screams of those first battles. They remembered how their strongest weapons had done nothing. They remembered how the Terrans had let them go, as if daring them to return. Every soldier knew, deep down, that this war would not be like the others. When the new fleet entered the Forbidden Zone, the stars themselves seemed to dim. The humans did not wait this time. The moment the first Imperial ship crossed the boundary, the zone awoke in full fury. Massive defense platforms rose from hidden moons. Drones poured out in endless waves, fast and merciless. Gravity storms twisted reality itself, dragging Imperial vessels into black holes that appeared without warning. And at the center, the Terran warships advanced, larger and deadlier than before. The Empire's fleet fought with all its power. Dreadnoughts unleashed barrages that shook the void. Carriers released swarms of fighters, flooding the battlefield. For a moment, the admirals believed they could win through sheer numbers. But numbers meant nothing against the Terrans. The human ships cut through the Imperial lines like blades through water. One strike, one shot, and entire squadrons were erased. The dreadnoughts, once symbols of invincibility, fell one after another, torn apart by weapons no one could understand. Panic spread faster than orders. Captains broke formation, fleeing in every direction. Communications collapsed under the weight of screams and static. Admirals shouted for control, but their voices were drowned out by chaos. The Empire's greatest fleet, its symbol of eternal dominance, was breaking. And then it happened. The largest dreadnought in the fleet, the pride of the Empire, faced the Terran flagship. It fired everything: plasma beams, missiles, and energy cannons brighter than suns. The void itself shook with the fury of its attack. When the light cleared, the Terran ship still stood, its shields glowing calmly. With one single strike, one beam of white fire, the dreadnought was cut in half, its wreckage spinning into the abyss. The sight shattered what little courage remained. The fleet collapsed completely, commanders abandoning their ships, soldiers begging for retreat. The Empire had not just lost. It had been broken. The Terrans did not pursue the survivors. Instead, they sent one last transmission across the battlefield. The zone is forbidden. You will not be warned again. The words carried across the stars, searing themselves into every Imperial mind. The Empire had come to crush humanity. Instead, it had been humbled, broken, and made to crawl back into the dark. Humanity had returned, and they had reminded the galaxy of a truth long forgotten. The Empire was not eternal. Nothing was. The news of the Empire's defeat spread like fire through dry fields. Worlds that had once bowed without question whispered in secret. Admirals who had once spoken with pride now spoke with fear. For centuries, the Empire had ruled unchallenged, yet in a single battle, its greatest fleet had been crushed. The Forbidden Zone was no longer just a place of myths. It was the heart of a power greater than anyone had imagined. It was the heart of humanity. In the Senate, chaos reigned. Senators shouted over one another, demanding explanations, demanding vengeance, demanding silence. Some argued the Terrans must be negotiated with, that peace must be sought before more lives were lost. Others screamed that peace was weakness, that the Empire could not bend. But the truth was clear in every trembling voice. They were afraid. The very idea of fear was poison to the Empire, and yet it spread through every hall, every soldier, every citizen. The image of Terran ships, glowing like demons in the dark, refusing to fall before the might of the throne, had broken the illusion of eternal rule. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the Forbidden Zone, humanity gathered. Their fleets no longer hid among ruins and old defenses. They rose from the dark like storms, vast armadas of steel and fire. The ancient silence was gone. Now the zone was alive with signals, patrols, and stations that glowed brighter than suns. For centuries, humans had been forgotten, erased from records, treated as nothing. But they had not died. They had endured. And now they prepared to step forward once more. On the bridge of the Terran flagship, a figure stood before the stars. He was not an emperor, not a senator, not even a king. He was a commander chosen by the will of his people. His voice was calm, his eyes sharp, carrying the weight of centuries. He looked upon the reports of the last battle, upon the broken Imperial fleet that had fled in terror, and he spoke only one sentence. The galaxy has forgotten us. It is time they remember. That sentence became the seed of awakening. Across hidden colonies, across fortified moons and deep bunkers, humans rose. Soldiers donned armor that had waited for generations. Engineers activated weapons that had been locked away. Civilians gathered with fire in their eyes, ready to reclaim their place. The silence that had protected them for so long was no longer enough. They would not remain shadows. They would not remain legends. They would stand in the open, and the galaxy would see them for what they truly were. The first sign came when Terran ships appeared outside the zone. They did not attack, but they did not hide. They entered trade lanes, passing Imperial scouts without fear. They sent warnings to neutral worlds, declaring that humanity had returned. They broadcast messages across the stars, not threats, but truths. We are not myths. We are not gone. We are here. And with every signal, with every sighting, the galaxy trembled. For the Empire, this was disaster. Fear turned to unrest. On distant worlds, rebellions flared, inspired by the Terrans' defiance. Armies once loyal to the throne began to question. If humanity could stand against the Empire, why couldn't they? Admirals hesitated to send fleets into the zone, their soldiers whispering that death waited inside. And worst of all, the people began to hope. Hope was more dangerous than any weapon. Hope was something the Empire could not control. The Emperor himself, hidden deep within his golden palace, raged with fury. He declared humanity an enemy to be erased, a disease that must be burned from the stars. But even his words, spoken with the power of centuries, could not silence the truth. The Terrans had shown the galaxy that the Empire could bleed. And once blood is drawn, others always strike. The Terrans did not seek to conquer. They did not claim to rule. But their very existence was rebellion. Their ships, their weapons, their voices, all of it reminded the galaxy of a time before the Empire, a time when freedom still had meaning. And so, world by world, system by system, eyes turned toward the Forbidden Zone. Not with fear. With hope. Admiral Kavarn, disgraced and broken, watched this change with hollow eyes. He had entered the zone believing himself a conqueror. He had left it as a survivor, haunted by the sight of Terran power. And though he hated them, though he swore he would see them destroyed, he could not deny what he had seen. Humanity was not just strong. Humanity was unbreakable. And when the galaxy finally rose against the Empire, it would not rise under the banner of the throne. It would rise under the shadow of Terran ships. The Forbidden Zone was no longer forbidden. It was a beacon. The galaxy had thought humanity gone forever, but now their awakening had begun. And as their fleets spread outward, as their voices echoed across the stars, one truth burned brighter than all others: the age of the Empire was ending. The age of humanity had returned.